Hello everyone, this is Ketish here. In this video, I'm going to go through the AQA Combined Science Biology Paper 2 Foundation Tier. Question number 4 is on inheritance, variation and evolution. Salmon are fish. A species of salmon has the binomial name Oncorhynchus keta. Now, a lot of these names, binomial names, so it's very hard to pronounce. So it doesn't matter that you don't really need to know these names. As you can see, on purpose, I'm not trying too hard to pronounce it. For foundation, you just need to be able to say, okay, these names can be complicated, but that means you shouldn't be panicking. So, table 3 shows the classification for this species of salmon. Complete the table 3, choose the answers from the box. So you have class, domain, genus, kingdom, and species. So these are different group names which needs to fill in here. Now there's a very specific order. So the group names always starts with kingdom. Kingdom, and then comes phylum, then family, then genus, and finally species. It's worthwhile remembering this order because they can ask you a lot of the questions they ask you to is basically to fill in tables like this. And again, you don't really need to know the classification, all of this, right? But understand, it's better to know that binomial is actually means two, right? So the first part of the name, right, Oncorhynchus is basically the genus name, right? And the species name is Keta. Like humans are Homo sapiens. Homo is the genus and sapiens is a species for humans. Figure 5 shows sea lice attached to the skin of salmon. So you can see the sea lice, which basically look like small tadpoles over here, right? Which are probably like parasites which is feeding on the salmon through the skin. So it's basically salmon do have parasites like humans as well. So sea lice are small animals that feed on the skin and blood of salmon. Okay, so on a salmon farm, the salmon are fed with food made from soya plants. So the salmon are fed from food made from soya plants. Which food chain represents the salmon, sea lice, and soya plants? So you've got the salmon, sea lice, and soya plants. Remember, in any food chain, it's the plants or the producers which always needs to be at the start. So it would be the soya plants, followed by the salmon is eating the soya plants, which is being fed on by the sea lice. Remember, these arrows are showing the energy transfer direction, right? So the energy from the soya plants is going into the salmon, and from the salmon it's going into the sea lice when they drink on their blood. What do the arrows in the food chain represent? Okay, so we've kind of answered this question. The different numbers in the food chain, the predators in the food chain, the producers in the food chain, the transfer of energy in the food chain. The arrows are showing the transfer of energy in the food chain or the direction. Some salmon are more resistant than other salmon to sea lice infections. Salmon farmers selectively breed salmon. Salmon farmers, let me move that over there. So salmon farmers select salmon that are more resistant to sea lice and breed these salmon together. What is the next stage in selective breeding? Now remember, there's two types of breeding: selective breeding and genetic. right? Selective breeding is when you are selecting the animals. So what is the next stage in selective breeding salmon that are resistant to sea lice? So salmon farmers select the salmon that are more resistant to sea lice and breed these together. So that's your first step here. So if you're trying to breed the salmon, what would be you choose the salmons which are more resistant and breed the salmons together. Breed together the offspring that are more resistant to sea lice. And yes, that would be it. So once the babies are born, you would breed the offsprings and find that are more resistant to sea lice. Kill off any offspring that are resistant. Well, that would also help us to breed salmons. Remove the gene for resistance to sea lice from the selected salmon. Well, that would defeat our purpose as well. What is the process of selective breeding? When is the process of selective breeding finished? Tick one box. After one generation has produced offspring? No. When all offspring are resistant to sea lice, that would be it. When sea lice are living on all salmon, well, that's not it. Now remember, it is worthwhile to know what is selective breeding. And if you're finding it hard to actually remember, think of like cats or dogs. So let's say I have cats and I want black cats, right? Pure black cats. And I take a male and a female cat, and let's say they're half black and half white, and then I cross them and I get all the babies that are black kittens from the mother and the father, right? So, and I get a black kitten, a male and a female, and I cross them again, and I repeat it over and over again till I get all the kittens are purely black cats. That's what selective breeding is. Salmon that do not have sea lice are more profitable for the salmon farmer. Suggest one reason why. Well, if it doesn't have sea lice, that means the salmon are disease-free in a way, which means they're growing probably better as well. So, and they're probably bigger as well. So, salmon are bigger, or you could say they grow faster as well. So any one of those 2 points is fine. What is the disadvantage of selectively breeding salmon? Well, it's not always advantageous to selectively breed, like pugs. As pugs are selectively bred so that they have a very flat face. The problem is having a flat nose in pugs means that they find it really hard to breathe and they get easily infections in their respiratory system. So the same way, what is the disadvantage of selectively breeding salmon? All the salmon may suffer from the same disease. That's true. And if one salmon gets a disease and they're all identical in terms of the way they're resistant to, they might be resistant to sea lice, but they might be prone to the same disease, right? So all the salmon may suffer from the same disease. Fewer sea lice will infect the salmon. That's not a problem for us. The salmon will have a large variety of genes. Well, it won't. If we selectively breed, then we are actually reducing the number of genes. Other fish farmers have produced genetically modified or GM salmon. GM salmon grow large enough to sell in 18 months. Non-GM salmon grow large enough to sell in 3 years. GM salmon need 25% less food than non-GM salmon to get to the same size. So, as you can see, genetically modified salmon takes only 18 months, whereas the normal salmon takes 3 years to grow. And the genetically modified salmon only needs needs 25% less food. Suggest 2 advantages of farming GM salmon instead of farming non-GM salmon. What are the 2 advantages, as I pointed out? Right? GM salmon grow faster, right? So more profit. So imagine if you're growing genetically modified salmon and normal ones, within 18 months you can sell these salmon and get your profit, whereas the normal one will take 3 years for you to get the money back, right? And GM salmon cost less to feed, right? Why? Because need 25% less food, right? So somebody has to pay for the food for the salmon, which is usually the farmer. So GM salmon costs less to feed. Question 4.9. GM salmon are often farmed a long distance from wild non-GM salmon. What is the advantage of farming GM salmon a long distance from where wild salmon live? To give the GM salmon different conditions to wild salmon, not necessarily. You'd want to keep them in the same conditions because all salmons prefer a certain type of condition. For example, the temperature of the water and the amount of oxygen and so on. You don't find salmon in all types of conditions. To increase the genetic differences between GM salmon and wild salmon, maybe. To reduce the risk of GM salmon breeding with wild salmon. That's true, right? Now, genetically modified, we have actually caused that to happen. So we don't really want it to breed with the wild salmon. If it did, then there wouldn't, then once it mixes, then the difference actually is less and the wild salmon might actually be affected in the future. So we want the wild salmon to stay in that same way. That brings us to the end of question number 4, and I will see you in question number 5.